enjoying the sunshine, warm weather? Hope you have AC. I don't, so I have lots of fans right now. But, that's life. So we are continuing our study of the book of Leviticus today. We're going to finish it off so we can move on to Numbers next week and spend hopefully 6 weeks on the book of Numbers before we finish off with Deuteronomy. So it's a lot to cover, but we're going to get through it together. I like to always start off with a quote, sort of set the point, right? So, Leviticus is therefore more than a description of past historical events and more than a collection of dated laws. It tells us about God's character and will, which found expression in his dealings with Israel and the laws he gave them. Those who believe that God, the Lord, is the same yesterday and today and forever may look to the book's theology for insights that are still valid and relevant today, because we are going to be going over the law codes of Leviticus today and the Day of Atonement. So let's just start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this chance to study Leviticus, to draw insights out of your law codes and see how they can apply to today, Lord. And just let your message ring through us, Lord. And for us to remember that you do not change and that you're the same today as you were 3,000 years ago. And thank you for all you do for us, Lord. In your name, amen. All right. So, how to be holy. That's what the second half of Leviticus is about. That's the whole point of the book of Leviticus, is to teach everyone how to be holy. Right? This is, again, my bibliography. My commentary I use for Leviticus is down there at the bottom. If you really want to understand the sacrificial system, how it applies to Jesus in a way that's both scholarly but also written in very common vernacular that sort of takes obscure theological words and makes them easy to understand, Lamb of the Free by Andrew Rilara is really an amazing book. It really helped me wrap my head around things. So let's just kind of go over the temple system, just a quick review. So the temple system is about cleansing the people, the community, and the tabernacle/temple from pollutants, both spiritual and physical. So spiritual are sins. People need to be clean to enter sacred space, and priests and the objects in the temple need to be holy. So the atoning sacrifices is where this word kapor comes from in the Old Testament, and it means not really atonement. It means to wash clean in the sacrificial system, and outside of that, it means to ransom. So when you see the word ransom in the Old Testament, it's probably kapor. And you see atonement in the Old Testament, it's probably kapor as well. It cleanses both major physical uncleanliness and minor spiritual uncleanliness, so minor sins. It does not clean the big three category of sins, right? That's sexual immorality, bloodshed, and worshiping other gods, right? This temple system could not fix these issues. Those sins stain the very land, right? Cain killed Abel, the land cried out, right? We read that in Genesis 4. So the Holy Land, where God builds his temple, also needs to be kept clean. Too much of these sins will eventually cause the land to vomit out the people, and that is how God describes it. You will be vomited out from the land. As that has happened twice to them now, right? The first time was when the Babylonians conquered them in 564, I think, somewhere around there. And then, of course, in 70 AD, after they murdered Jesus, right? They shed innocent blood, and they were again vomited out from the land. So, water can wash clean minor physical uncleanliness, right? Anything that makes you unclean for like a day or less than a week, you can just usually take a bath and you're fine. Blood is for major physical uncleanliness, so things that keep you unclean for longer than a week, childbirth, skin disease, stuff like that. However, Christ's blood, right, is superior to the temple system, right? Christ's blood washes everything clean. Christ's blood poured out will wash the land clean. That's in Mark. So we have access to something better than the sacrificial system. And again, no Old Testament sacrifice forgave sins. That still required a repentant heart and praying to God for forgiveness, right? This is why you see in the prophets, I don't care about your sacrifices. I care about your heart. God says this over and over again. He says it in the Torah sometimes. Right? That's what God really cares about. This is just, the sacrificial system is to prefigure Christ and to depaganize the Israelites. They came from a culture that did sacrifices. God provided an outlet for them because they're going to keep doing it. And so he's channeling their instinct, their culture into him. That's the point of what he's doing with the Israelites. He's depaganizing them from Egypt. Well, he's attempting to. It doesn't really work, does it? But that's kind of the point. And that's ultimately why the law fails, because it is prefiguring something greater, right? So this brings us to Leviticus chapter 16, the Day of Atonement, or better think of it as the Day of Decontamination. That's really what's going on here. So this is Yom Kippur. That's that word Kippur again. The vowels are different. Every book I see transliterating this word Kippur gives me different vowels. So that could just be a quirk of Hebrew. It has different vowels depending on how it's being used in that grammar probably. So this is more commonly called the Day of Atonement. It's about removing contamination from the tabernacle, temple, and the community, right? Over the year, this contamination still builds up. It can even reach into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant is, where God's mercy seat is. That's bad, right? We can't be letting this stuff get to God, right? It's held on the 10th day of the 7th month. This is always a special Sabbath, regardless if it actually falls on a Saturday. You'll see this with all the feasts, right? They're usually special Sabbaths in addition to being feast. It's also a day of mourning. Leviticus reads, afflict yourself, right? That's a Bible speak for mourn, right? So this is why the high priest, this is the day, right? The high priest is allowed to enter the most sacred place to cleanse the temple by sprinkling blood of the sacrifice goat on the Ark of the Covenant. While the second goat carries the dirt out into the wilderness. It's like taking your trash to the curb, right? And then the garbage man picks it up, takes it to the dump for you. That's what's happening with what used to be called the scapegoat in older translations, but is more commonly translated as the goat for Azazel these days. So while this is the strongest cleansing available to the Old Testament sacrificial system, it could not remove stains of the land, right? So no amount of days of atonement could stop exile if they kept doing their heinous sins, especially when they're putting stuff in the temple itself. As we see in like Ezekiel's visions of what's going on in the temple. This law is given right after Nabed and Abihu's death. It does point that out in the text. Not sure, maybe, they just did profane the temple, so that might be why we're having, okay, we got to do something special. They didn't do it this day, because this is being given right before Passover. So we're at like the very end of their year, maybe at the start of the new year, because we're going to get a Passover celebration starting in Numbers. So we're in that point between Exodus and Numbers, right? So the temple dedication is going on right now. Moses explained how to be a holy people to them in sort of this week, it seems to be. Tabernacle, temple, they're the same thing and they're not at the same time. So I'm sorry if I'm mixing them up. Yeah, the tabernacle, or at this time it's the tabernacle. So Aaron and his two surviving sons are finishing off their 7 days in the tabernacle. They need to be quarantined from everyone to stay holy. That's when Nabed and Abihu got themselves killed. So the high priest wears a special garb on this day. He doesn't wear his fancy clothes. He wears plain, undressed linen, right? He's going in the presence of God, and he is not the man in charge any longer. He's not the high priest. He is a servant to the King of Kings, and he dresses appropriately. We read in the Talmud that they would tie a rope around the high priest in case he died in there. If he didn't do things right, so they could pull his body out. This is serious business, right? First, the high priest will sacrifice a bull. This is a purification sacrifice for himself and the other priests, and it follows all the steps. But instead of sprinkling the blood on the veil like you would do for a purification sacrifice, this is also called the sin sacrifice in other translations, so purification sin, it's that sacrifice. But he doesn't do it on the veil. He does it before the ark and on the mercy seat. And he needs to have his censer burning with smoke to sort of cover the mercy seat so he doesn't see God and die. It seems to be what the point of that is there. So this is the serious business here. He's going into the presence of God before Jesus' sacrifice. Second, he comes out and this is when the lots are cast for the goats, right? There's 2 goats. One will be the purification sacrifice for the community. The other will be sent out to Azazel in the desert, bearing the contamination, the trash, and taken it to the demon, the landfill, right? That's where that sort of stuff belongs. So one goat is for Yahweh, the other goat is for Azazel. So there is a debate, is Azazel a proper name or not? It used to be translated scapegoat, like the goat for Azazel, scapegoat. That's because they're like, that seems to be what it meant, but we have the formulation goat for Yahweh, and it's written the same way, goat for Azazel, so it seems to imply that the Hebrew is saying these are one goat's for God, one goat's for this demon. And the Jews did believe this to be an actual demon, but again, this is not a sacrifice, right? The goat is not killed. It's just the filthy community is just released out to the wilderness, out to the demons, out to Satan, right? Out to the adversary of God. Go away. We don't want it. You can have it, right? We know from the, well, we don't really know how the lots were chosen. The Leviticus doesn't give it any explanation. The Talmud in Yoma records how this process worked, at least by the time of Christ. And there's urn. And there's 2 discs in there, one white, one black. White one says for Yahweh, black one says for Azazel. The priest reaches both hands in, pulls them out. He doesn't know which is in which hand. He holds them over the goat, opens his hands. White goat gets sacrificed, black goat goes to Azazel. Now, this is not Leviticus, but this is what they believed, at least by the time of Jesus. If the lot's in the right hand, God has blessed Israel and is happy with them. And if the lot's in the left hand, God is not happy with Israel. And the Talmud records, the last 40 years of the temple, it was always in the left hand. Yeah, Yom B, same place that talks about all this. Always in the hand. There's another miracle associated with the Day of Atonement where there's a red string. It's supposed to turn white. God finds favor. Never turns white again. After 30 AD. So, that's a very interesting thing. It's in the Jewish sources. Yeah, but that's what they do. So the goat for Yahweh's sacrifice for the people is a purification offering, and he re-enters the Holy of Holies. So the high priest actually goes in twice, it turns out, if you're reading the text carefully. Yeah, Dan.
The information about the left hand, right hand, and the red string, is that all in the Talmud?
It's in Talmud Tractate Yoma B. I could look up the exact verse that it's found there, but it is in there. You can go look it up on a Jewish website, like kabod.org. You'll see it, and it's there. And there's also other miracles that failed in the temple at the last 30 years of its or 40 years of its existence. It was also failing a lot even before then. It seems since their last good high priest, which was at the time of Alexander the Great, I don't remember his name, but he was like the last one that they had good signs all the time. It was after sort of the Greek period began that's when the corruption started. That's when the Sadducees rose up. That last great high priest, his disciple was Zadok, who founded the Sadducees. So they're the Zadokites, that's what it is in Hebrew. We just somehow got Sadducees in English. But yeah, so that's kind of where they came from. So, goat's killed. Then the high priest places his hand on the other goat. He puts all the sins of Israel on them, right? He confesses them. And then it's driven out into the wilderness to the demon, which probably means someone let it out to like a valley or a somewhere far away that the goat won't wander back, because that would be bad if you send the goat out and it just sort of wanders back in, because it's a goat and wants to return to its home. Again, it's not sacrificed, right? It's against the law in Leviticus to sacrifice to goat demons, which they believed were wandering out in the desert, right? That was a very common folk belief. And God's like, don't do that, right? Yes?
Later signs of temple, they said that wandering goat would go into anybody's camp because it looked for humans, and they were horrified at the sins of Israel.
That would be bad, yeah. So again, it's driven out to the dump, basically, out to the wilderness. That's where all the evil dwells. That's how the Israelites saw the world. Cultivated land was ordered. That's what God wants. Wilderness is uncultivated. That's a place of danger, a place of demons. Then everyone washes, right? Aaron puts back on his normal vestments, and then he offers the ram as a burnt offering for him and the nation, and then also burns the fat from the 2 purification sacrifices. So the 2 animals had been killed previously, but the fat hadn't yet been burned. We know the book of Hebrew, right, teaches us Day of Atonement prefigures the crucifixion, where Jesus' blood purifies everything before he goes to the Holy of Holies. He's our high priest forever, right? He can stand there. Because, as Hebrew teaches us, Jesus accomplishes all the benefits of the Levitical system, both the atoning and non-atoning sacrifices. So the temple is, as Hebrews 10:1 says, a shadow of good things to come, right? Jesus' death institutes the new covenant and gives us the means of a perfect way to God and the true Holy of Holies found in heaven. Jesus' death, in a way, has decontaminated the heavenly temple to allow us entry. So you can go read Hebrews chapter 9. It really covers this in detail. Those are the appropriate verses if you want to study more. And, well, that's the end of the Day of Atonement. And now we go to the law code that fills up the rest of the book. So do we have any questions on the Day of Atonement? Who's ever heard this, that we can break? Oh, Dan, do you have a comment?
I've heard that this was called the day that no man knows, because it couldn't start until the priest saw the new moon in Jerusalem. The moon day.
That's true. Whenever a holy day happens, like they start their month at the new moon. And so they need to see the new moon in the sky above Jerusalem. And if it's cloudy, they can't see the new moon. So they'll just assume the month is an extra day long, because a month period can be 28 or 29 days. So on the day 29, they go like, is this start of the month, or is this going to be a 29-day month? If they can't see the moon, they just assume it's a 29-day month for their purposes. And then they start their count from there. And yeah, it has to be Jerusalem by the time of their, I don't know what they were doing back here, but that's what they had come to do by at least the time of Jesus. So yeah, on that way, like, yeah, they don't know precisely, because again, their months are variable and they don't know how long a month is until they see the new moon and can judge it.
That meant a lot to me reading Jesus' statement that his return would be on a day that no man knows.
True, yeah. So we're going to talk about the law. That's what the rest of Leviticus covers, chapters 17 through 27. So whoever heard we can break the Old Testament Torah law into the civil, the holy codes, that's the temple codes, and the moral laws? Anyone heard this before? I see a few nods. Right. I don't know. I hear this on YouTube all the time when people are trying to make sense of the Old Testament laws. And they go like, well, we really just have to, as Christians, we just have to worry about the moral law, right? We don't need to worry about the civil law and the holy law. We could just pull out the moral law from the Torah and just care about that. Has anyone heard that before? Yeah.
Heard occasionally 2, but never 3.
Yeah, well, people use the 3. I've heard the 3. So is that something we can even do? Here, let's look at this law. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring the guilt of blood upon your house, if anyone should fall from it. Deuteronomy 22:8. So is this a holiness law? Is this a civil law, or is this a moral law?
So one of my go-tos as a quality control professional.
It's a good one, right? I mean, it seems like a civil law on its face. But the guilt of his blood upon your house? That's not good. That's holiness stuff touches blood guilt. And of course, is it moral to make something unsafe and someone falls and hurts themselves? Right? It's a moral law. Like digging a cistern and not covering up so, someone falls into it. Like, that's a law, right? So You'll see people who are grappling with the Old Testament laws. They're like, what's up with these slavery laws? I don't like that. Well, that's like a civil law, and we don't have to worry about that, right? You know, it's not one of the moral laws, right? Or they look at some of the laws with women, or like you know, the uncleanliness for childbirth and, you know, their periods. They're like, well, that's one of the holiness laws, and we're not bound by the holiness laws any longer. And we're not considering what the point of the law is, all right? And how we should be looking at the Torah to make sense of it, to defend it to today, all right? So we just can't pick and choose the Old Testament laws, right? But at the same time, we can't just apply Old Testament laws to modern day society. So we should not think of the Torah laws as a civil code. We have civil codes, right? You can go look up like RCW.196.3.17, and it'll give you some paragraph of legal text on why you can't fish without a permit or something like that. I mean, we got thousands and tens of thousands and I don't know, probably millions of laws in this country by now. That's not what the Torah is. It is wisdom literature for judges, chiefs, and eventually kings to know how to apply the Ten Commandments to their society. So all the laws that we see in the Torah, therefore, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, agrarian society, for people that keep crops, have herds, slavery is a thing, women were seen as second-class citizens, right? That is just the culture of the time, and God is applying the Ten Commandments to this culture, so it makes sense for them. Slavery laws, right? They're the employment laws of the time, right? Yeah, there are sinful practices that we see that are being regulated by the laws. Polygamy, regulated by the laws. Slavery, regulated by the laws, right? God is not endorsing them, but he is trying to put safeguards because it's going to happen, right? Our government doesn't promote gambling, at least the federal government doesn't. Our state government does with the lotto, but the federal government doesn't, but it has laws regulating it because they understand people are going to do it, so you need to put safeguards on it. Like, we have laws about how much, alcohol you can drink in a bar, because the government doesn't want to endorse you getting drunk. They're also putting safeguards to keep you from getting drunk, hopefully. It doesn't work, but that's what it is in practice. So that's what the Old Testament's doing. It's putting safeguards. It's putting boundaries, that God believes or his people will be able to accept. So, and Leviticus specifically is, again, about a book about being holy. Right? So all the laws in Leviticus are on that, how to be a holy people. So you'll see more of the civil stuff in Exodus and Deuteronomy and a little bit in Numbers, but Leviticus is how to be a holy people. So we have any questions about how to view Torah law? Yeah, Dan.
Maybe just a comment. I struggle with this, but I realize that the degree to which the people could trust God's statements was limited by their degree of trust in their own ability to understand. So if he made requirements that were too far away from their normal practice, they would say, I must not have understood it. He's limited in what he can get through by their confidence in their understanding. And I think that's why there's some degree of compromise with Tacoma.
There's a law that in Leviticus that, adultery, you get put to death. But if she's your female slave, you only have to pay a fine. And it's that boundary where she's seen as your property. And so the Bible's like, that's wrong, but the culture's not going to accept the death penalty for this. And the girl shouldn't be put to death at all because she's a slave and didn't have a choice in the matter. But the master just has to pay a fine. And that's a compromise. Divorce, compromise. Jesus says it himself in the New Testament. All right? They had stubborn hearts. No people are more stubborn than Jews. I don't mean that, I mean the ancient Jews. They were very stubborn people. All right, so we get to laws of sacrifice, right? So during this period, the 40 years wandering in the wilderness, all domesticated animals butchered for food have to be sacrificed at the temple, right? Or the tabernacle, I'm sorry. I should say tabernacle. We're at the tabernacle period. No animals can be slaughtered for food except as a peace offering, right? The peace offering is the one where you get to eat a meal with God. If a man violates this, he has shed blood. It's a violent act, right, to just kill an animal for no good and not do it properly, I should say. There are proper reasons to kill an animal. One is for food, and you need to do it properly. And he will be cut off from his people. By sacrificing the animal, the life is given to God, and the blood is properly disposed of by the priest. Later in Deuteronomy, they'll be able to slaughter their own animals on their own, but they have to dispose of the blood properly. They have to bury it, right? So why are they only doing it at the tabernacle at this time? Why didn't God just let them slaughter their own animals, right, as long as they bury the blood? Well, those goat demons that we talked about on the Day of Atonement. Leviticus is worried that they're going to kill their animals and be like, goat demons, don't harm my family, I'm going to kill this animal and eat it for dinner. This is what they did back then. So this is to de-paganize the Israelites, to get them used to the sacrificial system, right? To train them on the sacrificial system, on giving only to their animals to God, not to sacrifice to God, other gods, demons, whatever, right? They didn't worship the demons, they were doing it to keep the demons away, right? Like you would throw a bit of meat out into there and keep the demon away, or probably more likely the wolf. But in the land, it'll be up to the Israelites to just not sin by sacrificing to demons or false gods on their own. It'll be on them. But right now, these are the training wheels, right, as they're in the wilderness. This is why a whole generation has to die out in the wilderness, so their new generation who grew up in the new system will have a chance once they get into the land, right? Blood must be properly disposed of so as not to stain the land. Life is in the blood, remember that. And that word there is ruach, that's the breath, right? It's in the blood. Eating and drinking blood is like you're stealing the life force of the animal. There are some cultures that believe that. You drank the blood of a lion, you would be strong, right? That belongs to God. So, if you're properly disposing of the blood, you're returning that life to God. Otherwise, you're despising life, right? Now, Israelites were allowed to hunt game at this time. There were deer and gazelle running around in the desert, and they didn't have to bring it back to the temple to kill it. That would be impractical, right? I shot a deer with a bow, and now before it dies, I have to get it back to the tabernacle. No. So as long as they properly killed it, slit the throat, let the blood pour out, and then buried the blood, they were fine. It's how it works with domesticated animals later on. The reason you can't eat an animal that's killed by natural causes, because there's going to be blood in the meat, and you really can't get it out once it's been dead for too long, right? It starts to coagulate in there. That's why it's unclean to eat an animal that died of natural causes. However, weirdly, non-Israelites, residents, aliens, and visitors, they were allowed to do this. It just made them unclean, and then they just had to wash and they were fine. So that was a weird, that's one of those compromises, right? God's like, well, we're not going to apply this one on the sojourners, right? They usually have to follow the laws, but sometimes there are exceptions for them. Then we get the laws on sex, right? Bloodshed's a major sin. Now we get sexual immorality, right? Verse 3, you shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I'm bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. God is saying, all the stuff I'm about to say you can't do, they do. And we know they do. Right? The surrounding cultures had worship orgies. They permitted various forms of incest. They had cults centered around bestiality. There was one in the eastern delta where the Israelites were living, where women cohabitated with goats at the time of the Exodus. Right? This was in their neighborhood. So, God warns if they participate in this, the land will vomit you out when you make it unclean. Now, today, you'll find progressive Christians arguing the law against male homosexuality is only speaking about temple prostitution. You're going to run across these arguments. You get on the internet. There's a United Church of Christ pastor named Brandon Robertson, very, very pro-gay, and he'll make these arguments. Hebrew has the language to differentiate between just a homosexual behavior and men participating in temple prostitution. Deuteronomy bans that explicitly. Kings mentions it happening in the land and needing to be driven out. So Hebrew has the language for this. That's not what it's talking about. It is talking about consensual male-on-male relationships. The other argument you'll have is that Leviticus doesn't ban relationships between women, though the New Testament does. And we have to wonder, why is that not banned in Leviticus? Leviticus is very blunt on what it's banning. It has a huge list of things in this chapter. Probably because these laws are written from the sort of male agency, and there's sort of a prejudice at this time. It also might be that this was not a major problem at this time, whereas male temple prostitutes and male homosexuality was a problem at this time, and that's why it got included. Again, though, God defines sexual immorality as any sex act that's between a husband and a wife. And we can translate the male-on-male prohibition against women-on-women prohibition. And again, Paul writes explicitly in several parts of the Bible that that's not allowed anyways. What's interesting, in the middle of the sex laws, God condemns sacrificing your children to Moloch, profaning the name of God. I was like, why is this here? Why did put that here amidst all the sex laws? Yeah, Betty.
If they had participated in the worship of Moloch, you start having babies with someone else's spouse.
Yeah.
And offer these babies back to Moloch.
Yeah, that's the point. This is how we make babies, is through sex. And so, of course, if you're participating in all this sinful stuff, you're going to making babies for this. Yes, Dan?
I think it's motivated by the same thing that motivates medicine abortion in our culture. It's the desire for the economic burden of raising a child to be removed, so they can still have the sex, but they don't have the economic impact.
Yeah.
They were very keenly aware that life was fragile and didn't have a lot of excess food. So this appealed to them. To the godly, it was, okay, if God gives me another child, somehow he'll provide. It's an act of trust.
Yeah.
If they didn't trust God, Moloch was not a God to be trusted.
True.
This was a natural response.
Yeah, and we have found altars with children skeletons, baby skeletons around them. Archaeologists identify Roman brothels by baby bones. That's how they go, this is a brothel, there's a lot of baby bones here. Yeah, so, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, they just, instead of making it seem like I'm just giving up, they're translating into something else, right? And just like people who have abortions translate that idea into something else to get away from what they're really doing. Yeah. But now we have laws on being a good neighbor, right? You need to be a holy people, you got to be a good neighbor, right? It's not just abstaining from sins, but it's being proactive in helping your neighbors, right? You shall be holy, for I am holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. This is over and over in Leviticus, right? So honor your father and mother, right? That's being a good person, right? Keep the Sabbath. That's honoring God. Don't worship other gods. Also honoring gods. We get laws to take care of the poor, the sojourners, to love your neighbor and care for the elderly. We get this verse here at 19:17-18. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Right? Jesus says, like you've heard it said, if you murder someone, that's violent. But if you hate them in your heart, that's also murder. And he's pulling that straight out of Leviticus, right? The Israelites forgot this by the time of Jesus. And it's so easy for us to forget this lesson. And then we get weird laws like don't mix fabrics. But that's because priests had special garments and it was very special. And, don't mix crops. That's just bad farming to begin with. There's the hair grooming laws. You're like, why are men not allowed to do certain things with their hair? And it comes right after laws against divination and magic, probably implying that these special grooming things were probably part of magic rituals. Like maybe you're cutting hair off to offer it for a ritual. And God's like, don't do that. That's being a bad neighbor. Temple prostitution is banned here because it profanes the girl, right? Being a bad neighbor. So that's those laws. We get the capital punishment laws, right? For the three major sins, it's almost always death or banishment if you commit one of them. God will cut them off. sacrifice a child to Moloch, death. And God really hammers this one a lot. Don't sacrifice children to Moloch. It was a big problem. The Ammonites worship Moloch. Around the conquest, we have found their sites where they've done it. For a long time, archaeologists tried to say this didn't happen during the time of the conquest, that it was just made up by later Jews, but we have now since found the proof. We get sexual immorality of all forms are given punishments. Some have the death penalties, and some say you shall die childless. God is cursing you. You're not going to have children. You're not going to produce with, and they're all with incestuous cohabitations. So these are not adultery in the strictest sense, because the woman is probably a widow or was never married. But they're sort of these illegal common law marriages between close family members. And what's really weird is the Hebrew uses hesed. Everyone knows hesed? Steadfast love of the Lord, that's hesed. But here that steadfast love has been corrupted, twisted, perverted from what it should be into lust. And God is cursing them with no children. Right? So that's why if you see the childless one, God is cursing them, saying, don't do that, you will not have offspring. And again, that stuff was allowed. Like Moses' father married his own aunt. So this is, and Moses just said, no, don't do that. You know, Abraham married his half-sister. Moses saying, don't do that. Jacob married 2 sisters. Moses said, don't do that. Actually, only Isaac is the only patriarch that hasn't had a violation there. No, Isaac didn't have. Isaac married someone that was fine in the Torah system. He married a cousin. Cousins aren't banned in the Torah. Law for priests, right? They got to be careful about making themselves unclean. Can't go into the temple if you're unclean, right? That's bad. They can't marry a woman that's been divorced or practice prostitution, right? Because even in their marital relationship, it needs to be like a holy bond. Because, you know, again, divorce is a compromise. They could marry a widow, but the high priest had to marry a virgin and a woman of good character, right? Because he has to be extra holy. So if you're like, I'm the son of the high priest, you got to anticipate becoming the next high priest, so you got to follow this, right? Otherwise, you'll be, you know, disinherited, or however that works. He can't have blemishes. He can't have deformities. He can't have any missing an eye. Yeah, he can't have skin diseases, right? Because an ideal living creature is whole and healthy. We covered this last week in the cleanliness laws. Priests must be clean while serving, so they must have this idea of being sort of the perfect ideal of a human. They are, of course, permitted to share their portion of sacrifices with their family and dependents, right? That's how they feed and provide for their families. And just as the priest must be an ideal living creature, so must sacrifices. That's why they can't be blemished, right? Because it's not the ideal creature if it's blemished. And you can't give a blemished creature to God. All right, you've got to give your best. And we got all the holy days. Right, so we all know them. There's 6 of them. There's 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall. They all are at various harvests, so they follow the harvest cycle of Canaan. And they're bookended by Passover, which celebrates what God did for them, getting them out of Exodus, and Booths, which celebrates what God did for them while they're wandering in the desert. So they'll remember what God did for them. We get laws for the tabernacle. Right? It's the people's job to provide the oil to keep the lamps burning, to provide the showbread or the bread of the presence to be put on that little table and for the priest to eat. We get a strange, weird interlude about a Danite woman in this chapter whose father is an Egyptian, which means he's not an Israelite. Your father determines what race you are. So he is an Egyptian, even though his mother is a Danite. He blasphemed by using God's name in a curse, so he's trying to put a spell on someone using God. Right? He's like, you know, Yahweh curse you so all your hair falls out. We find these in curse medallions actually in the Holy Land. Teenage girls will curse their romantic rivals for all their hair to fall. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing they found. But they're like, he's a sojourner. He's not an Israelite. Is he bound by the violation of the 3rd command here? That's the question that's brought to Moses. And Moses is, yes, if you're going to live in our land, you're going to not blaspheme against our God. And so they stone him to death. And the importance about stoning is the community kills him, and no one is sure who actually threw the stone that actually killed the person, so you can't be guilty of the death. That's why they did stoning. For one, it's a community getting rid of evil, and so no one can be sure they're the one that did it. It's like firing squads, only one guy has a bullet, none of them know which one it is. So none of them can be say for sure that I was the one that actually killed the prisoner. Same reason. Jubilee year. Every 50 years, there's supposed to be the Jubilee year, right? To keep people from being perpetually exploited by the landowners and the wealthy and to become serfs, essentially slaves, tied to a piece of property. All slaves are freed, all land is returned to the family it's supposed to be, and the land itself gets a rest. So in purpose, though not in practice, the Jubilee year was to prevent the rich from buying up all the land and creating vast estates. They could only rent the land from an owner for up to 49 years. It was not practiced, however. But the point was, once in your lifetime, you got to reset, right? Sabbatical years provided periodic relief, but Jubilee was to keep things from becoming tyrannical. However, Isaiah 5:8, Amos 2:6, other places, it got tyrannical. The rich oppressed the poor more and more. We see this in the archaeology. The houses of the rich get bigger and bigger and bigger in Israel as the years go on, and the poor are forced in the slums. So God put this in place to keep economic tyranny, and the Israelites and their kings who were supposed to be enforcing it and their leadership did not, and it was one of the reasons they go into exile. And so we should be thinking about that in America. How do we handle people getting more and more wealth and people getting poorer and poorer? Like, how do we do this thing, right? You know, and do it fairly, and how do we promote it? How do we keep it? Because eventually you get a bunch of poor men who think they don't have a future, and they will try to take that future by force. That's what happens to societies that disenfranchise a large group of young men. Then we get the blessings and curses. If you obey the law, God's going to bless you, right? And this uses metaphors we find in other ancient Near East documents, Hittite treaties, Egyptian stuff, you know, like you obey the law, the gods will bless you. You break my laws, gods will curse you. Same thing. But God essentially promises three things: the gift of rain and good harvest, the gift of peace, and the gift of God's presence. The curses are the reverse of that. You break these laws, you'll get the curse of drought and famine, and cannibalism. That's the result of that. The curse of war, and the curse of exile, which is the removal from God's presence. But the chapter does end with a promise of restoration after exile. Restoration is always a possibility with God. You see this in the prophets, and we see it here in the Torah, the foundation of it all. And this should be where like Leviticus should end, right? You're like, all right, we got the blessings and curses. Then we got one more chapter, the laws of vows. It's kind of a weird placement. Some people think like, did this get accidentally put at the end of the book and it should have been at a different spot? Or after we saw what the consequences of breaking the covenant are, God's like, okay, now let's talk about vows. Because vows are like mini covenants, right? So you know the consequence of breaking the big ones. Let's talk about mini covenants, because those are also, that's what vows are, mini covenants with God, right? So they're voluntary agreements. You're invoking God's name. So if you break your vow, you're breaking the third commandment. So this is serious stuff. This is why in Jesus' time they swear on the temple, they swear on the land, they swear on everything but God. So they can break their word and not violate the third commandment. And Jesus says, no, God created everything, so you're actually still swearing by God. So just make your yes be yes and your no's be no's, right? So you can make a vow to be dedicated to the temple, like Samuel. That's that special vow. But you can always get redeemed from that with money. Say your family needs your labor, they can buy you out that gives silver amounts. Unclean animals can be sacrificed by just giving them the temple to work for the priests. Right? An unclean animal does not spread uncleanliness. Even the high priest could ride a donkey and then go into the temple and make sacrifices because it doesn't make you unclean. They're just not fit for eating or sacrificing to God. But they can do labor. Firstborn animals automatically belong to God. You can't vow them because God already owns your firstborn animals. God also owns your firstborn sons, but he decided to take the Levites for himself. We'll get into that in Numbers. Then there's the ban vow, the haram, right? This is devoting to destruction is one way this gets translated. Anything declared haram is fit only for God. And the conquest uses Haram language. Jericho was put to the Haram. That's why it's destroyed. That's why every man, woman, and child is put to death. And that's why everything is destroyed or burned, and you couldn't keep anything. And this is why Achan is in big trouble when he does, because that was all given to God. So if the temple can't use it, it has to be destroyed. The temple can take people and make them into slaves, and then it'll still be fine for the Haram. That's where you get that point in Joshua where the people lied about being a distant people. And when they find out, they're like, well, you only can cut wood for the temple because you're technically under the ban. And that's all you're fit for now as a slave, is to help out the temple or the tabernacle at the time. It's doubtful the average person can make this vow. This is probably something only chiefs or the king could make a vow for. The nation of Israel makes this vow in Numbers. We'll see. And then Leviticus ends with, these are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses, the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. And yeah, that's actually the very, very end of our lesson. We'll be doing Numbers 1 through 6 next week, so much less reading. We'll spend a bit more time on it. I'm sorry that it starts out with a bunch of numbers, but that's why it's got that name. So we'll just end with a prayer. Lord, thank you for this time to study Leviticus, to understand how your laws work and how we should think about applying the Ten Commandments to our lives and to our nation and to the laws that our country creates, Lord. And just let your lessons fill our hearts, Lord. And in your name, amen.